Welcome to the Engineerable channel. In this video I'm going to show how to disassemble and reassemble the JM-X2 Glock style gel blaster. I'm going to be stripping this thing all the way down, and we're also going to be taking apart the gearbox and putting it back together. So the first thing to do is to remove the accessories. So take out the magazine, set that aside. Now we're going to remove the battery compartment. You can do that by pushing this red button here, and that slides off. And the first step in opening up this blaster is to remove the slide. The easiest way to remove the slide is to pull it back until it locks. Put your finger underneath the back of the slide, pull and lift up away from the blaster, and then push on the other side. It just comes right off. And then slide it off the front of the barrel. Remove the spring, and then the next step is to remove all the screws from the body of the blaster. So we're going to start from the front all the way to the back. And now you're going to carefully lift up the body of the blaster away from the gearbox. And pay attention to this mag release button and spring. Keep those together. And then this switch cover also comes off. These tabs that stick out here on the sides are the features that push the slide back and forth each time. Inside the slide you can see these ramps, and the ramps are what the piston tabs hook onto to push the slide back. Now pushing the slide back might be a cool effect, but it's also more stressful on the gears and the motors. So if you want to disable the recoil action on this blaster and save the gears and the motor, an easy thing to do would be to either trim these tabs here that come off of the piston, or trim these ramps that are in the slide. This blaster has an extraordinarily long T-piece feed tube, and so it takes a lot of gel balls just to fill this up, and then you have to make sure that it gets emptied at the end when you play too, otherwise it's going to get jammed up with dried out gel balls. Also, something that's interesting is there's like a ball detent down here that's designed to keep any balls that make it past that point up in the tube and not back out when you remove a magazine. Remember which side these contacts are? The black negative contact is on the left, the red positive contact is on the right. Same here, black contact is on the left, red contact is on the right. This is the trigger switch, just a simple micro switch. Take a look at this trigger return spring, make sure you don't lose that. Alright, let's take apart this gearbox. Take a note that there are two slightly longer screws in the gearbox, and they go here and here on each side of the motor. So make sure you put those longer screws back in the right place. These longer screws measure 8.53 millimeters versus the shorter screws measure 7.5 millimeters, so the longer ones are 1 millimeter longer. They made this gearbox trickier to reassemble than other gearboxes I've seen before. So let's go over the parts. So you got the motor pinion gear, the bevel gears right here that the motor pinion gear interfaces to. There's a ratchet pawl down here that prevents the gearbox from being back driven. There's a medium-sized spur gear here that drives a larger spur gear that then drives the sector gear. The sector gear has some missing teeth because it's intended to pull back the piston and the cylinder with different timings. So the piston gets pulled back, and then the cylinder gets pulled back, which allows a ball to load, and then the cylinder is released forward, which pushes the ball into the barrel, and then the piston is released, which shoots the ball out. This piston cylinder is also smaller in diameter than most pistol-sized gel blasters, so there's going to be less air volume shooting out, and the barrel is very short. It's from about right here to right there, to not even there. So you can see that the barrel is super short on this one, about 2/3 the length of like a gel blaster surge. So the ball starts off right about here and it only has that distance to accelerate. So of course the performance is not going to be great with that short of a barrel. When you pull this gearbox apart, you're probably going to have some gears left on one side, some gears left on the other. It's going to be easier to put them all on one side, so I'm going to go ahead and take apart this gearbox gears and then show you how to put it all back together. Now we're going to go ahead and take everything else apart. Take out the spring. This is a spring support bracket on the end. You can take the barrel off. So the T-piece and the barrel are integrated. The piston and the rubber piston seal go inside the cylinder. These gear racks fit next to each other. Okay, to reassemble this gearbox, we're going to take the barrel, T-piece, put that plunger in, take the piston, put it inside the cylinder. I'm going to put this large spur gear on first, so it goes on this post here. Then I'm going to put the sector gear down. And then I can put this smaller spur gear. And this is the anti-reverse latch ratchet pawl. So the spring goes around it like that, hooks on, and then you load up the spring, and then put it on this post right here, and set it down inside there. And the bevel gear does have a washer on the back of it that you need to keep, and that washer acts as a thrust bearing. So set that bevel gear down over the pin, and you need to rotate the anti-reverse latch so the bevel gear will go down all the way. There we go. Make sure that washer is still on there. If you've removed any grease from this gearbox while you're doing this, you can use some Super Lube multi-purpose synthetic grease to grease up this gearbox again to make sure it's well lubed. Okay, so now we're going to take this cylinder barrel assembly, put the spring on there, set this down in here, and put the spring over the post. Rotate the gearbox in a position such that none of the teeth on the piston or the cylinder are engaging. Now put the spring in the back here. And we still have to put the barrel end on. It's going to be easier if you put the motor in on the left-hand side first, under the bevel gear. And then we're going to try to very carefully reassemble the gearbox. And we've got to make sure that all those pins line up. We're closing up the cover, all the pins that the gears are on. There we go, went together pretty well. Still have to put the trigger back on. This trigger and the trigger mounts are very flimsy, so be careful when you put this back on. It's not a very good design. There we go. Okay, it's time to put the screws back in the gearbox. Remember that there's 2 longer screws, and they go in the back here first. The trigger return spring has to be installed. Make sure that when you pull the cover off, you pull it straight off and don't pull it off an angle, because I pulled mine off a little bit at an angle and it snapped one of the pins that locates with the body, and unfortunately it's the trigger return spring pin, and so the trigger return spring is barely hanging on. Hopefully when I put the body back together, it's going to prevent that trigger return spring from popping off. Okay, so we've got to put that trigger return spring on. So loop it around the trigger hook, put it over this pin. Hopefully your pin is in better shape than mine. These wires go back up in here, behind these other pins, also behind that pin. Switch goes right here. Then we need to put the trigger micro switch back on the other side like this. One important thing with the wire routing is that there's nothing in the way of the screw boss here, so these wires have to be up and out of the way up here. And then the last step is to put the switch cover on, and the mag release pin, and the spring. And when you go to assemble it, hold it kind of at a downward angle like this, so that everything lines up. And you got to make sure that the mag release spring lines up with that hole in the other half. And line all that stuff up. There we go. Remember that there was one slightly longer screw, so that's going to go in the back here. That screw was already stripped when I pulled it out. And the final step is to put the spring on the end, put the slide over the end of the outer barrel, and then snap the slide down. There you go. Ready to go. Now if you've done everything right, when you put it back together, it should shoot just fine like before.